everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Adoption. I'm Heather Featherston.
And I'm Kim. Thanks for joining us today. And today we're going to be talking about a really tough but important topic, adoption scams, specifically the emotional scams that target hopeful adoptive families.
Now, before you panic, I just want to say this right up front. Adoption scams are rare, but when they happen, they can leave an emotional mark. And we've seen how damaging that can be, especially for families who may have been waiting a while to adopt already.
Exactly. And a recent case that made national headlines really highlighted this issue. You may have heard about Gabby, the woman who was even featured on Dr. Phil a while back. She recently pled guilty in federal court to multiple charges after running an elaborate scam where she pretended to be a pregnant teenager, leading families to believe they were going to adopt her baby.
And it's shocking, it's disturbing, and I think it's even heartbreaking for families who were involved. But, today I really want to take this opportunity to talk really frankly about how emotional scams in adoption work, why families can be vulnerable, and really, most importantly, what they can do to protect themselves.
hmm So let's start with the basics. When people hear the word scam, they usually think of money, like someone asking for cash or gift cards. But in adoption, there's another kind of scam we sometimes see, emotional scams.
Right. And an emotional scam is when someone pretends to be pregnant, pretends to be considering adoption, but they never actually plan to place a child for adoption. Instead, what they do is manipulate families emotionally, giving them hope, pulling them along, and often controlling them with things like threats, with guilt, even with dramatic stories.
hmm And unlike financial scams, these don't always involve money. The reward for the scammer can be attention, power, or just the thrill of manipulating someone.
And for adoptive families, the damage can be real, even if no money is lost. It's the heartbreak of thinking, this is it. We're finally going to welcome our baby. And then realizing that not only was none of it true, the person they were talking to, you know, may not have even been considering this except to try to get attention for herself.
And when we say talking to, that could even be through social media.
Yes.
If she's messaging you, she found your profile online, she found your Instagram or other social media account, and you feel like you've been talking to her all day or for weeks, and come to find out her situation is couldn't be further from real, or maybe it's even partially true, but there was never an intention to place a baby with you.
Right. And before we really kind of dig in, Kim, I do want to talk briefly about moms who do change their mind. I know I've talked to adoptive parents in the past who've said, oh, we were scammed. And when I ask more about it, I find out that no, they were matched with a birth mom and she was pregnant. And maybe they even helped her with expenses and she legitimately changed her mind. That is not what we're talking today about today. That is someone who had intent. Maybe she was on the fence about that intent, but she truly was pursuing adoption and had a change of heart. We like to say that adoption is a matter of the heart, and it's a big decision, and it is not uncommon for women to change their mind, especially when they may not have had the help and support throughout their pregnancy in making an adoption plan. But those change of hearts aren't what we're talking about today. We're talking about an intentional, emotional scam that we are saying a woman, sometimes it can be a man, anybody pursuing this, especially if they're doing it online, hiding behind the internet, um, only for the thrill or the attention that they're getting out of perpetrating this.
hmm So let's talk about the recent case of Gabby Watson. She's 29 years old and recently pled guilty in federal court to cyberstalking, threats, and identity theft.
Right. And I'll just say, I have talked to Gabby many times. I think you have too, Kim.
Yes.
She has been at this for many, many years. But here's what happened that kind of really brought this to a head, involved the FBI, and brought it to court. She had been impersonating real pregnant teenagers and young women. She would steal their photos, their ultrasound pictures, their names even. She'd gather all this from social media. She'd get maybe pick baby bump pictures. She'd get details about their boyfriends. So when families were contacted, they would go to that person's Facebook page and it would corroborate everything Gabby was saying.
hmm
So she'd gather that, then she would contact waiting adoptive parents and pretend to be that person.
And in one case, she told a couple in Tennessee who had already been waiting 8 years to adopt that she wanted them to adopt her baby. She shared ultrasound photos, called and texted them constantly, even asked them to buy baby supplies.
Right. And then it escalated, as it often did. She started making dramatic claims, saying the baby had a medical emergency, or she was threatening to back out of the adoption. She even threatened to hurt herself, the baby, or the adoptive parents.
And this wasn't just one family. She did the same thing with others, even involving children. She talked to one family's young sons on the phone, telling them to be excited about their new siblings. That part breaks my heart.
Right. And these families weren't just scammed, they were, emotionally manipulated and emotionally tormented. And that's why federal prosecutors got involved. They talked to a lot of families and then they pressed charges. As you said, Kim, Gabby recently pled guilty and now she may be looking at prison time when she is sentenced early next year.
It's an extreme example, but it shows how damaging an emotional scam can be. And as we see now, it's actually a crime.
Right. So, you know, it's easy to see how these scams can work, but let's talk a little bit about why they work. Why do families fall for this?
Honestly, it's because adoption is filled with vulnerability and hope, and families want to believe. They've been waiting, praying, preparing, and when someone says, I want you to adopt my baby, it feels like the answer to everything. I mean, on their path, they're waiting for someone to tell them, I want you to adopt my baby. And may have doubts, but they're stepping out in faith. And that faith can also leave them open to looking for signs that God has this child for them in a very specific way, such as through this person that contacted them who really has no intentions of placing with them. So they're very, very vulnerable and very, I would say, Heather, they're very emotionally close to the scenario. So that's
Mhm.
also what makes them vulnerable because, if they are acting as their own, I would say, adoption professional, maybe they're screening birth moms on their own, or maybe their adoption professional doesn't have much experience, that leaves them very vulnerable as well.
Mhm. And you know, people who perpetrate these types of scams know that. They play on emotions. They create urgency. They make families feel like they have to respond immediately or they might risk losing the baby.
And with social media, it's easier than ever for scammers to find families who are publicly sharing about their adoption journey, which is good. That's not to say you shouldn't share, but you do need to be aware of the risks.
Right. And we're going to talk about some of those risks, but I do want to add one more thing in here too. And that is that, you know, especially when you are sharing your adoption journey, and you're doing that to try to increase your reach. You know, it's not just emotional scammers that can see that. It is financial scammers. And you just have to guard your heart, I think, in a different way. And so that's why I really want to get practical here. Let's talk about some red flags that families should look for.
Mhm. So here are a few big ones. Like Heather mentioned, urgency and control. If someone insists, you respond right away at all hours and gets angry when you can't. That should be a red flag, make you raise an eyebrow, make you question. Another thing is inconsistencies, stories that change or don't quite add up. And Heather, you and I have both worked with scenarios, and our team has worked with scenarios where there are inconsistencies simply
Hmm.
because her situation is moving and changing from the
Hmm.
point of time where, let's say, a birth mother is reaching out to an agency and she is inquiring and shares a little about her scenario. Then she completes a full intake. And then she's presented with profiles of families, perhaps, and she picks one and schedules a time to talk with them. And then they agree to match. And then it comes time for the baby to be born. At each of those milestones, there can be time in between during which her circumstances can change. And so if new information pops up, it doesn't mean that she's a scam. It doesn't mean that, she's lying. It's just that her information may change over time. And she also may feel more comfortable over time with revealing deeper layers of information about
Hmm.
what her situation really is. That doesn't mean that she's a liar, and it doesn't mean that she's not sincere. So it's important to recognize that difference. But certainly, inconsistencies should definitely give pause and should be looked into and reconciled if possible. And then constant crises. Now, this is also another one where a regular everyday birth mother could also be in constant crisis, right?
Hmm.
But it's also maybe if you have two or three of these warning signs, then you're
Hmm.
really wondering, is this
Yes.
sincere? So, constant crises. Every day there's a new dramatic emergency, medical problems, threats, danger. Or, now this is a big one, Heather, isolation. They
Yes.
they don't want to talk to your agency or attorney. They want to keep everything just between you and them. And that is a telling,
Yes.
very telling sign. Now, at first, it's normal that she may say, well, I just don't know how I feel about involving
Hmm.
someone else, and I don't know who these people are, your agency, your attorney.
Hmm.
But over time, she would normally agree because she wants this adoption to happen. And she understands that legal paperwork needs to be in place. She needs to make her documents available. She needs to sign release forms. And you can't just do that with directly just with adoptive parents. That has to be a professional that's
Right.
requesting your medical records, etc. But if she is kind of setting you up to be isolated and sticks with it, I would say that's definitely a
Hmm.
red flag. And then over the top manipulation, threatening to hurt themselves, the baby, or you.
Right.
And Heather, I know you've had experiences with each and every one of these through
Hmm.
your years in working with adoptions and birth moms.
Right. And, a real expectant mom who's considering adoption will usually welcome support. Now, like Kim said, each of these, red flags, they can, they don't necessarily equal scam. Um, but uh, in the emotional scam cases I have seen and worked with, there's no how to say this. There's no give on some of these points. For instance, the urgency, that it doesn't go away. It stays urgent. Oh, you're not answering me. Are you mad at me? Things like that. Inconsistencies, that that can often show itself as wild inconsistencies, not minor inconsistencies. Um, the isolation, Kim, I think that's probably the big tell there.
Hmm.
And and even if they do, finally give in and talk to your agency or talk to your attorney, they might flip around and tell you things like, well, they just didn't understand me, or they asked me too many questions, or this is the one I love because this is the one I've heard a lot. Well, I called and they just don't call me back. Really? I mean, here where we are, we're available 24 hours a day. There's nobody you need to call back. There's always somebody here to talk. So it's one of those things that the isolation, it may not um it may not feel right off the top like they're trying to isolate you because they may have good answers for those things. But it's one of the ways that they kind of, I'll say, keep you to themselves. They're getting your attention, they're getting your care, and that's what they're after here.
And they can sometimes string you along too. That's a tactic
Yep.
to maintain isolation, where they will schedule a time or say that they will, and then they just don't show up or keep the appointment.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
So just remember, um, a, a, a real mom who's thinking about adoption, she usually will welcome support, even if she's feeling um, hesitant or has questions or might feel ashamed that she's having to get help in this situation. But that doesn't mean she won't do it. She won't try to control you through avoidance, if that makes sense.
And keep in mind that someone who is trying to take advantage of adoptive parents, she may actually be pregnant or she might not be pregnant at all. It could be either scenario.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
she may actually be able to um, present her own medical records and ultrasound and photos of herself, and that may truly be her, but she may not have an intention of placing, and that happens sometimes. I want to speak for a moment about our sponsor, the Lifetime Adoption Foundation. It's a nonprofit that exists to give back to the people most deeply impacted by adoption. For birth parents, the foundation offers educational scholarships, a way to invest in their future after placing a child for adoption. For those considering adoption, there are free resources and support tools to help them explore their options with clarity and care. And for children who may be more difficult to match with adoptive families, like older kids, siblings, or those with special medical needs, the foundation provides grant funding to help make those adoptions possible. You can truly make a difference. Learn more or donate at lifetimeadoptionfoundation.org.
I want to talk just a little bit more here about why people do this. We touched on it earlier, and on the show page today, we'll go ahead and link to the interview Gabby did on Dr. Phil. And you can hear in her own words why she did it. But I'll just tell you, it was for attention. And I'd love to say she went on the show and was very apologetic, but that isn't true. She was a little apologetic, but right after it was over, she started doing it again. And I don't you can watch that show and certainly you can come to your own conclusions, but it's pretty easy to see this is a girl who's hurting. This is a girl who needs help in her life that she probably isn't getting. And if you take that thought and apply it to any type of emotional scam, it probably is a pretty good template for what people who perpetrate this are after when they are not after money. The scams for money are much easier to understand. The emotional scams are very difficult to understand, which also is one of the reasons that it is easier to perpetrate because it's just attention seeking. That's all.
Hmm. So, how do you protect yourself?
Well, first and foremost, families need to work with a licensed, experienced adoption professional. An adoption professional can verify pregnancies. Let me just say, an ultrasound photo isn't enough. They can be digitally manipulated. They can cut the top off so you don't see the date. They can steal them from someone else's social media page or just steal them from Google Images. So that's where an adoption professional will verify the pregnancy. They'll also provide real support to moms considering adoption. Um, and not to say that adoptive parents can't provide support. Certainly, they can be an emotional support, but you know, the adoption professional is doing it um, with certainly the best practices involved, but also they're able to do it without that hope that if they just say the right thing or do the right thing, then she'll go through with it. They're able to be kind of impartial and can look at it from a perspective without emotional involvement, which is very, very helpful. They
Hmm.
also will act as a buffer between families and potential scammers. And honestly, I think the biggest thing that an adoption professional brings is that experience. Now, have adoption professionals, been taken in by scammers? Sure. But the ones who have been around, who work frequently with real expectant parents, um, it doesn't happen very often because scammers will often see that it's going to be difficult here, so they will move along.
Right. And I remember over the years, Heather, doing intakes, being on call on our 24/7 hotline, um, where you would get a call, or I would get a call, and it would be someone who's really in a hurry.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they would say, I don't have a lot of time to fill out a bunch of paperwork. This is what I need, and I don't have time to mess around. So they would often say things like, I'm having a baby girl, I'm having girl boy twins.
Hmm.
Twins, a girl and a boy. It's the fantasy dream situation for
Right.
adoptive parents or many agencies who don't have a lot of experience, but they
Hmm.
wouldn't be willing to fill out paperwork.
Hmm.
So my observation over the years has been they want to do as little as possible, as little paper trail as possible, in as short time as possible for as much as they can get. So actually telling someone in the first conversation they need to be wired something. And this is kind of crossing the line into the financial scam territory. But while we're on the topic, it's just important to talk about this. Never send money or gifts directly to someone you meet online. Legitimate support always goes through proper channels. And when you are vetting an adoption professional to determine whether or not how they operate aligns with you, you should ask, in your practice, how do you handle helping out in a scenario? How do you handle if we're providing financial support? How is that given to the expectant mom?
Hmm. Right. And you were talking about calls you've taken, Kim. I
Hmm.
I know the ones that are always most memorable to me are those late Friday afternoon ones where someone needs a place to stay right now and
Yeah.
threatens to call another agency or even abort their baby if you know we don't fork over a hotel room. And it's it is. It's manipulation. And in this case, you're right. It crosses over. We're talking about financial, but it is emotional manipulation to
Hmm.
get what they want. So, you know, if something feels off, trust your gut. It doesn't mean you have to shut them down. But, let's just be honest. If you are a waiting adoptive parent, you are not the best person to evaluate a situation for whether or not it is legitimate. You're just not. You have your heart invested in this.
Hmm.
You know, talk to your adoption professional, get them involved, um, give them all the information, talk it through with them. Don't ignore the red flags. You know, I also have talked to adoptive parents who had to abandon uh, adoption plans after being taken in by extreme financial scammers, and some that even had attorneys involved as well. Don't ignore red flags. And if your adoption professional says, hey, these are some big red flags, listen to them. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you have to walk away. It just means that, you need to involve them. You need to use their expertise. Um, Let them ask the hard questions.
Hmm. So, this is also about emotional resilience.
Oh,
Even
yes.
when you're working with an agency, there can still be disappointments, women who change their minds, situations that don't move forward. And these aren't a scam, that's just part of adoption. But having professionals in your corner helps you tell the difference and recover faster when things don't work out. And this should be something that the professional talks with you about before you even enter into a scenario. You should know how they operate if a birth mom changes her mind or if it didn't work out with an agency, with a adoption opportunity. You should know what the financial consequences are, and what the risks are. And that's part of what you're going to decide is a fit for you, whether or not, as you enter into, a partnership with an adoption professional who's going to begin helping you adopt, as well as when you enter into a match with a
Hmm.
potential birth mom.
Hmm. So, I think really the bottom line is understanding that adoption scams are rare, but, you know, they can be devastating when they happen. And certainly I for one am glad that if nothing else, this legal action has stopped Gabby because really and truly, she's been at this, mm, I would say probably for close to 10 years.
Hmm.
And that is an extreme example, but it reminds all of us of the importance of safeguards.
Right. And I mean, in the case of Gabby, where Heather and I can actually know that it's her the second we answer the phone,
Yes.
it's really important to have an adoption professional with that level of experience. And you, as an adoptive parent, this might be your 10th conversation with a birth mom, but it's not your 1,000th. And that makes a
Hmm.
difference. So
Hmm.
remember, you don't have to walk this road alone. When you work with a trusted agency, you have people watching out for you, protecting your family, and helping you navigate the highs and lows.
And I would really stress don't let the fear of scams keep you from pursuing adoption. There are far more real, life changing stories of hope and connection and promises fulfilled than there are of stories of adoption scammers.
And that's something I wanted to take a second to just remind. We said that in the beginning, but it can feel like something this big can be in your mind and heart a big threat that could keep you from moving forward. But our real experience is that adoptive families actually rarely get scammed, especially when they're working with an experienced adoption professional. That adoption professional, sure, may receive calls on a regular basis from people who aren't sincere. But as they walk that person through their natural screening process, they fall off face of planet. They fall off the
Mm-hmm.
map. They don't make it through the screening. It's a little too much effort. It's a little too much finagling. They can't materialize, the paperwork that's needed. They're not willing to open themselves up in a concrete way. So just remember, your adoption professional is fielding those. It's not something that adoptive parents normally encounter. That'd be pretty rare. So I just want to remind you of that. We're talking about this so that you can be aware of it, but it's certainly not the norm. And thank you for joining us today. And if you'd like to learn more about protecting yourself on your adoption journey, or if you suspect you've encountered a scam, reach out to your adoption professional right away.
And if you have any comments about today's show, you can get in touch with us on the website, letstalkadoption.com, or you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. Please remember to subscribe, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Adoption.
Thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Adoption. If you'd like to learn more about today's episode, please visit letstalkadoption.com. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Until next time, take care and God bless.